morning, church. So great to be here with you all today. I heard a story, a couple of years ago now, I think it was. And the story goes somewhat like this, is there was once a couple and they'd grown old together, and now the wife was passing away, and she knew that she only had a few days left. And so she called her husband close and she whispered in his ear her last request of him. And she said, would you please keep watering my plant? And she pointed to a plant in the room, and he thought, must be a precious plant to her. And he said, yes, of course I will, my darling. I'll keep watering the plant for you. She passed away a few days later, and he very faithfully, for the next several years, watered her plant every single week. And to his delight, it stayed healthy and green and beautiful. After a few years, he passed away as well, and his daughter came and she was cleaning up the house, and she saw this plant that had been so precious to her mum. And she went and she picked it up and she went to pack it into a box, and as she picked it up and handled it, she realized for the first time that it was really light. And as she inspected a little bit more, she realized that it was a fake plant, and that it was not in fact a precious plant to her mum. Her mum had just had one last final joke before she had died, knowing that her husband would be watering it week in, week out, faithfully for the next few years. You see, we can get plenty of fake plants, and he got stumbled because it looked like the real deal. It ticked most of the right boxes. It had the right coloring, it was about the right size, it was about the right shape. You know, it looked like the real deal. It ticked most of the boxes, but it failed to actually be a plant. There's plenty of things in life that are a lot like that. For example, decaf coffee. It ticks many of the boxes. It smells like coffee, it looks like coffee, it tastes somewhat like coffee, but it fails to actually deliver on what coffee is supposed to be. It's the same is with, I find, don't know about you, healthy desserts. Have you ever been tricked by a healthy dessert at a cafe? You see it in the cabinet, it looks beautiful and creamy and delicious, and you pay the exorbitant amounts because for some reason it's more expensive than all the rest of them, and they bring it out to your table and you take a huge bite and all you can taste is dates and nuts and coconut. There's no sugary goodness, and there's none of that stuff, you know, that a dessert should really be. It ticks most of the right boxes. It looks like a dessert, you know, but it fails to actually be a proper dessert. Come on. Another one I've found is somewhat like this, is relaxing family holidays. If you have children, you know what I'm talking about. You go away and you go to beaches and you go to theme parks or you go visit family, and it looks like a relaxing family holiday. You can put all the Instagram photos up that you want, but deep down inside you know that it was not relaxing whatsoever, and you need a few days off from it when your kids go back to school, when you get home. You know, there's so many things in life that look like the real deal, and they tick so many of the boxes, but that's where it stops. They fail to actually deliver on what it is that they were intended and supposed to be. If I was to be honest, I've found that so many times in my Christian life, I've probably been guilty of doing the same thing. You know, of going through the motions of being a Christian, ticking the right boxes, looking the part, sounding the part, acting the part, doing the right actions in the right songs, you know, and singing the right words when the songs come up, and we look the part of a Christian, and we tick most of the boxes of it. But sometimes, if I'm to be honest, I think that we fail to actually be what it is that we were intended to be. We fail to actually know God sometimes. You see, I was reading this story in the Bible recently where Jesus was talking one day. And this man came along, says he was a religious man, and he asked Jesus a question. This is a tick-the-box kind of Christian. And this is what he said to Jesus one day. It's in the book of Luke, chapter 10, starting in verse 25. It says, one day, an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question. Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus replied, what does the law of Moses say? How do you read it? The man answered, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Right, Jesus told him, do this and you will live. The man wanted to justify his actions, So he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" This is a tick-the-box kind of guy. He's coming to Jesus and he's saying, tell me exactly what boxes I must tick in order to get a ticket to heaven. Tell me what things I must accomplish in my life and be in my life in order to get to heaven. And Jesus, as he so often did, he turns a question back to him. Always be a little bit concerned when you're asking Jesus a question. You're never quite sure what his answer will be. And he turns it back to him and he says, "How do you interpret the law?" The man comes, and to my surprise, he actually gives a really good answer. He says, this is a man who's not had the New Testament. He hasn't had Jesus walking around and teaching. He's taken the law and everything that's been taught, and he has seen in it what the truth actually is. He said it is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, body, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. I think he gave a really good answer for someone especially from his time. But yet Jesus goes on. And to this man's surprise, Jesus didn't just expect him to know the answer. He says, "Do this and you will live." In this moment, I can imagine the man begins to get just a little bit unsettled and squeamish and nervous in his tummy. You see, as he thinks back to earlier that day when he snapped at his children, or when he was going out last week and he was in a big hurry and he rushed past the widow on the side of the road, or he got a little bit agitated at the market when the person was a little bit slow and he yelled at them somewhat. And so I can imagine he's thinking of all these different people. And so he asks the question of Jesus, trying to justify his actions. Because surely this is ridiculous. And he says, "Who exactly is my neighbor? What box must I tick in order to accomplish this?" And so Jesus goes on and he tells him this story that we so commonly know in the church. Starting in chapter 10, verse 30 of Luke, it says this: "Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along. But when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn, where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, 'Take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here.' Now, which of these would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits?" Jesus asked. The man replied, "The one who showed him mercy." Then Jesus said, "Yes, now go and do the same." So Jesus is confronted by this man, a religious man, a man who knew all the right stuff, asking this question: what must I do? Who must I love? And he tells them this story. He tells the story of a man who was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho one day. It doesn't tell us what this man was doing, why he was traveling along this road. Perhaps he had a family event on in that town that night, or perhaps he was selling a piece of land, or perhaps he was visiting a friend. I'm not sure why he was traveling, but he was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. To put in a little bit of context, the distance between Jerusalem to Jericho is very similar to the distance between here and Gladstone. That's the distance that we're talking about. However, I know that between us and Gladstone is a whole bunch of Queensland scrub that often gets a bad rap, but it looks somewhat lush and rainforest-like compared to the road between Jerusalem and Jericho. You see, I've got a picture, I'll put it up on the screen, of what the road is between Jerusalem and Jericho is like. There is no shade, there's no trees, no grassy patches to rest, no beautiful lakes to lay beside, not even a pond of water on the side of the road. This is the road between Jerusalem and Jericho. When Jesus told this story, they immediately knew what he was talking about, because this was a common road to them that they knew about. This road, because of its condition, because of the way that it was set, was actually a very dangerous road for people to travel on, and that was commonly known. You see, there was plenty of places for people to hide along the way, and it was isolated and away from people. And so it was a common place for thieves to come and attack people, attack groups of people as they were traveling between Jerusalem and Jericho. And so straight away, every person there knew that this could easily happen. And so one day Jesus said this man was traveling along this road. As he was going along the road, some way along there, he was attacked by a group of bandits, this version says. Says they beat him till he was half dead, unable to help himself anymore. They stripped him of his clothes and they left him lying there naked on this road. There's no grassy place to rest your head. There's no shade for you to find. He is completely vulnerable and isolated. He cannot help himself and he is left there in pain. Thankfully, but the story goes on and Jesus tells us, to the listener's delight, a priest comes along the road. This is a man who knows God. This is a man who actually is anointed and set apart to serve God. This is a man who knows all the right things about God, who follows all the right procedures and steps and rules and traditions, otherwise he cannot fulfill his role. This is a man who ticks all of the right boxes of what a Christian, a follower of God should look like. It says that he was also traveling along the road one day. Maybe he's going to a new temple meeting that day. Maybe he's going to visit his sister's new baby that she had, or maybe he was going to sell a cow. I don't know what he was doing. But he was traveling along the road when right in front of him, on his way there, he saw the man in the middle of the road. He saw that he was naked. He saw that he was beaten up. He saw that he was in pain. I don't know what the man was thinking in this point because it doesn't actually tell us in the Bible. Maybe he saw the man lying on the road and he thought, what a drunk lying there. It would have looked somewhat like it. Maybe he saw the man lying in the middle of the road and he thought, hey, I would love to help, but I'm running late for my meeting right now. I've got to be in the temple in like 3 hours. I've just got to keep going because I already left late this morning. The kids were being chaotic and I've just got to keep going. Maybe he saw the man lying in the middle of the road and to be honest, he wondered if he was even alive and he thought, I don't think there's really anything I could do to help him anyway. Maybe he saw the man lying in the middle of the road and thought, somebody else will come along today. Whatever reason, it says that he walked to the other side of the road and he kept on going. And the man stayed there in his pain. But thankfully the story goes on and it tells it that even though the priest failed to help him, thankfully a temple assistant came along now. This was a man born into a family that was set apart to be servants of God. This was a man who had to follow the right ways of living and follow the right rules in order to fulfill his position. This was a man who knew a lot about God. This was a man who ticked all the right boxes of what a Christian should look like and act like and sound like. And it says that he was also going along that road one day. I don't know why he was traveling. Maybe he had a block of land to sell. Maybe he had a meeting to get to. But as he was going along, he saw the man lying in the middle of the road, naked and in pain. This guy, it says that he went over and he had a look. Doesn't tell us what he thought then. Maybe he saw the man and a little alarm bell went off in his head and he thought, maybe this is a trap. Man, this is one of the bad guys, trying to lure me into helping them and then they're going to attack me. Maybe he saw the man in the middle of the road and he thought, I've just bought new clothes today. I'm not getting them messy. Maybe he saw that man in the middle of the road and his hands were full of all the things that he had to carry into town and he thought, I just can't carry anything else right now. Or maybe he saw the man and he thought, I don't really have the skills to help him today. It says that he just kept on going. And so this man that's in pain and in need and helpless is left again in the middle of the road. But Jesus goes on and he says a third person comes along in the story. And this time it's a Samaritan. And every person listening on knew exactly the kind of person Jesus was talking about when he said that. Because you see, the Samaritans were despised by the Jews. They were not followers of God. They did not live their life right. They were not good people. They were not right people. They weren't right with God. And they were not born into the right family. They did not tick any of the boxes of what a follower of God should look like. But it says that this Samaritan was walking along the road and he too saw the man lying naked in the middle of the road. But there was something different about this man. Because it says when he saw this person in pain and in need, that he felt compassion towards him. And so he went over and he had a look. I'm sure this man had a life just like those other two guys had. I'm sure he had places to be. I'm sure he was busy in his life. I'm sure he had things going on, and I'm sure it was inconvenient for him to stop. But yet, despite all his excuses, we see him respond in a completely different way. He gets down off his donkey, and it says that he soothes the man's wounds. And then he bandages them up. And then he places him on his own donkey and walks the rest of the way into town. Can you imagine for a moment walking into Gladstone? You know, he's given up his ride. It's like giving up your car halfway into Gladstone, saying, no worries, I'll walk the rest of the way. He has given up his ride, placed another man on it, and begun to walk into town. He takes the man to an inn, and he goes one step further, and he pays somebody to care for him, because he has to keep on going. And he says, I'll be back later, and if it costs any more than that, I'll pay you for the rest then. This is a man who didn't tick any of the right boxes of what a follower of God should look like. But this is a man who sacrificed to love another person. Yeah. Jesus tells this story to the man. And he says, now go and do the same. This is what it looks like to be a follower of God. This is what it looks like to live the life that I have called you to live. You see, I've begun to realize as I go on in life that knowing how to do something and actually doing it are two completely different things. I know how to do a lot of things, and if you jump on social media, so does the rest of the world. They all know how to do everything the right way. I found out when I was just a young teenager, this lesson the hard way. Me and my brother, my older brother, would go to the skate park regularly, and I would rollerblade, he would skateboard, and he was a little bit more adventurous than I was, so he could go on everything. He was going on quarter pipes and half pipes and doing tricks. And here I was on my rollerblades just like rolling down the little hills and rolling up the little hills and having a good and safe time. But I watched on as everyone else learnt how to do all the proper tricks and learnt how to, one thing particularly was to drop in the quarter pipe. That was something I wanted to do. And so I watched for quite a while how my brother did it, and I watched how other people did it, and my brother explained to me how to do it. I knew exactly what to do. And then one day I decided this is going to be the day I'm going to do it. And so I gathered up my courage, and I came to the edge of the quarter pipe, and then I waited. And I waited, and I waited. You know when you just don't quite have the courage to make the jump in? And then finally I summed up every ounce of courage that I had, and I dropped in the quarter pipe. And as soon as I dropped in the quarter pipe, that's when I knew this was a terrible, terrible idea. And every little ounce of courage I'd gathered to muster together fled out of my body immediately. You know, and as soon as that left, it's like the show was over, because as soon as you think you're going to fall, you know you're going to fall. And so you're dropping in, and as quick as it took me to drop in, it was as quick as I slammed onto the ground. And I think I ran around squealing for quite a while about how sore my tailbone was after that effort. You see, just because I knew how to do it didn't mean that I could yet actually do it. You see, God is not looking for a church or people that know the right answers. It did not impress God that this man knew that we are to love the Lord God with all our heart, mind, soul, body, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves. But what he was looking for were people who would actually live it out, people who would actually walk it out, people who would be willing to sacrifice and serve others because he served us first. You see, it says this in the Bible. It says, "Dear children, let's not merely say that we love each other. Let us show the truth by our actions." Yeah. The one that confronts me even more than this is found in 1 John 4, verse 7 to 8, and it says this: "Dear friends, let us not continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves is a child of God and knows God. But anyone who does not love does not know God, for God is love." You see, walking this command out of loving God and loving others is not optional in following God. This is actually his greatest command to us, is to love God and to love others. If you look out across our city, it is full of people who are in pain just like that man. It may not be as obvious as walking down the local bike track and seeing someone naked in the middle of the road beaten up. But there are people in pain right across our city, whether it be physical, emotional, spiritual, people in pain across our city that Jesus so desperately loves. And he's actually calling you and I to be the ones that would go and love them practically, to be the ones that would actually have compassion on them, to be the ones that would actually care for them. I feel so challenged when I hear Christians, we talk about, how could God let people suffer and how could God let people be in pain? But I think it's the wrong question to ask. Why aren't I going? Why aren't I serving? Why aren't I loving? Because I'm the one that God actually sent to them. You see, when there's people in my city in pain, they're my responsibility. They're the ones that God is calling me to. Not to have all the answers for them. Not to fix every problem. You see, the thing I love about the story of the Good Samaritan is he was simply going about his normal everyday life. He didn't go out there looking for people in pain, but he was just going about his normal everyday life. When in front of him, he saw somebody in pain. And instead of making excuses about what he couldn't do, he couldn't fix the problem that had happened, he couldn't fix the road so it would never happen again, he couldn't make sure this guy had employment for the rest of his life, he couldn't make sure that this guy had enough money to buy a house, he couldn't make sure that this guy had a great marriage, he couldn't do all those things. But what he simply did is he asked himself, what can I do with what I have? He simply cared for him with the commonly known practices of how to care for somebody's wounds. He simply got off his donkey and walked so another man could ride it. He simply used his hard-earned money to pay for physical accommodation and care for the man. He didn't turn his life inside out and get him saved and set apart and on a great purpose in that moment, but he simply did what he could with what God had placed in front of them. He simply loved him practically with what he already had in his hands. What is it that God has placed in your hands that when you run into people in need that you can actually use to care for them? You see, so many times that we chase after all these amazing, beautiful things in following Jesus, but I think we miss the first beginning rung of loving others the way that God loved us first. We are passionate about being a church that loves people practically because it's a command from God. This isn't just a nice idea. This isn't just a fluffy message. This is a command from God to love others, not in word, but in action and in truth. Yeah. That's what God's called us to be. I want to invite the music team back up. We're going to finish in just a moment. I speak this message today because this is something that I have to grapple with every day as a follower of Jesus. You see, it's so easy, I find, to just fall into religion instead of falling in love with God some more. Instead of loving others the way that God has called us to love. You see, God doesn't call us to love our city because they've earned it or they've made no mistakes or they've been good enough, but he calls us to love because he loved us first. You see, Pastor Howard was talking about when Jesus came and died upon a cross, and God set the ultimate example of what it looks like to love people practically. You see, God saw us, you and I, humanity, in pain and in need and in nakedness and in vulnerability. And he didn't just look on and go, really sorry that happened to you. Scratch that one off. But instead, he took the most precious thing that he had, his son, and he sacrificed it. Not because we earned it, not because we were good enough. Most of our pain and suffering, we put ourselves in that situation by our own choices. But he did it because he loved us. And he calls us to do the same. Yeah. To love because he loved us. Not because they earned it, not because they deserved it, not because they didn't make mistakes, but because he loved us. And so we can love others. That's why we love people practically. I want to invite you guys to jump to your feet. We're going to pray this morning. I find that so often I need to come to this place where I just do a little bit of a heart check for my motives sometimes. You see, it's so easy to get busy in my life with all the things that I think are important. I feel like so often God has a bit of a sense of humor. It's been a busy few weeks, and so I'd made the decision I'm going to set aside some time to get ready for Sunday. So I'd had it all set out and set apart time that I was going to get ready. And I kid you not, this week, every time I sat down to write my message, there would literally be a at the door. And it was somebody who just needed some help each time. And I felt myself just getting frustrated. Like, God, I'm trying to serve you here. And so I had to just make that choice. What do I do with the person that's in front of me currently in need and in pain and in brokenness? Because if I was to turn my back on them right now to go and do some work that I deem important, what kind of follower of God am I even? I find it so easy to prioritize the things of this world and the things that make us look good and the things that we've deemed most important above loving others, when it is the greatest thing that is on God's heart, is that we would love like He loved us. I think sometimes we've got to come back. We try and get up all these high steps in following God, but we've got to come back to the basics again of loving God and loving others practically. That every time we walk past a need in our city, that a little bit of our heart would break because it breaks in God's. There's an old song, it used to say, God, break my heart for what breaks yours. That would be our cry. That God, you would break my heart for what breaks yours. God, that you would show me people how you see them, God. That you would help me to see not the physical situation, but what's actually happening deep inside. I love how many times in the Word of God, Jesus cried because He saw somebody in pain. They weren't even people that He knew personally.